The train was too heavy. Maren had known it would be. She had measured it herself, 3 weeks ago, on her knees in the sewing room with a strip of ribbon and a stub of charcoal, while Celestine stood on the fitting platform and complained about the light. 16 feet of ivory silk organza, hand-embroidered with moondrop pearls from the Vile Coast, and now it pooled behind her sister like a slow white river, and Maren was the one who had to keep it from touching the floor. Both hands. Always both hands. Never let it touch. The great hall of Ashenvale Keep smelled of pine resin and candle smoke, and the faint, bittersweet musk of 1,000 wolf-shifters in formal dress. Territorial markers politely suppressed, instincts locked behind gilt buttons and ceremonial collars. Maren could read them anyway. 7 years of growing up at the edge of court had taught her what the undertones meant. The sharp, acrid spike of ambition from the northern pack lords, the warm, sandalwood thickness of the Ashenvale Honor Guard, the cool, metallic precision of the Alpha King's own scent drifting from the dais like fog off a winter river. She had not yet looked at the Alpha King. She was not permitted to look at the Alpha King. Her sister had said so, 2 nights ago, in the long, narrow room they shared. Shared still, even though Celestine was about to become Luna of the entire realm. "You'll stand behind me," Celestine had said, smoothing the cream at her throat with one careful finger, her pale eyes meeting Maren's in the vanity mirror. "You hold the train. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not—" A pause, precise as a blade. "Draw attention." Maren had said, "Of course." She had meant it. That was the flaw she carried, the one she would not name for another 3 hours yet. She always meant it. She had a talent for making herself easy to dismiss. Not shyness, not modesty. A kind of practiced invisibility she had worn so long she'd forgotten it was a choice. The horns sounded. 3 low, resonant notes that shook the candle flames in their holders and rolled through the stone floor up into the soles of Maren's feet. Celestine moved. Maren moved with her. The crowd parted. It always parted for Celestine. It had parted for Celestine since she was 16 and walked into her first court assembly, and every male in the room turned like flowers to sun. She was extraordinary to look at. Maren knew this with the same calm clarity with which she knew the moon rose in the east. It was not envy, exactly. It was just fact. Celestine had their mother's bone structure, high and sharp, and their father's coloring, that rare silver blonde that the old stories called moonborn. She moved as if the hall had been built around her. Maren was the shadow, brown-haired, neither tall nor short, with a mouth that was a little too wide and eyes that were a little too dark, and hands that were currently full of 16 feet of someone else's wedding train. The Alpha King waited on the dais. She should not look. She looked. He was not what she expected, was the first thought, traitorous and immediate. She had heard the descriptions. The realm had been full of them for a year. Calum Voss, 29th Alpha King of the Ashenvale line, sovereign of 9 packs, the man who had ended the Thornfield Rebellion in 11 days and rebuilt the border treaties in 6. Tall was what they said. Cold was what they said. The kind of handsome that belongs on coins, not on faces, too symmetrical to invite warmth. What they had not said, what no one had thought to say, was that he was tired. She saw it in one flicker before she looked away. The set of his jaw, the way his right thumb pressed against the inside of his left wrist as if checking a pulse that worried him. He wore black, formal, and unrelenting, and the alpha crown was already on his head, silver set with black tourmaline that caught no warmth from the candlelight. He was watching Celestine approach, but for 1 second, just one, his eyes had moved past her. They had landed on Maren. Her breath caught hard enough that the woman beside her turned and looked. Marin forced her face smooth. The silk was getting heavier. She shifted her grip and watched the floor and told herself it meant nothing. That was how eyes moved in crowded halls. She happened to be in the way. The ceremony began. She would remember very little of it afterward. The words of the bond vow, old Ashenvale dialect, spoken by the pack elder Sovin, whose voice carried the deep, rolling resonance of a man who had been large and loud for 60 years and intended to remain so. The moment the Luna crown went on Celestine's head, a smaller thing than the Alpha's, pale gold set with white opals, and it looked as if it had been made for her, which it absolutely had. The sound that rose from the hall, not quite applause, not quite howling, something between an animal. The sound of a pack acknowledging a queen. Marin's hands held the train. She kept her eyes down. She did not see the exact moment the Alpha King looked at her again. She felt it. That was the thing about wolf shifters that humans always misunderstood. It was not mystical, exactly, just physical. The weight of a predator's focused attention had a texture, a pressure at the back of the neck like a warm hand that didn't touch. She had been in enough rooms with enough alphas to know the difference between ambient awareness and deliberate regard. This was deliberate. The ceremony ended. The packs cheered. Celestine descended the dais steps, and Marin managed the train with the competence of someone who had spent 3 weeks learning to manage it. And she did not meet the Alpha King's eyes as she passed within 8 feet of him, and he did not speak to her, and the whole enormous hall smelled of triumph and candle wax and the particular animal joy of a people who had just watched their sovereign do what sovereigns were supposed to do. Marin set down the train at the bottom of the hall steps. Her arms ached. She pressed her fingers against her own thighs and told herself the warmth at the back of her neck had already faded. It hadn't. The feast lasted 4 hours. Marin ate alone at the far end of the secondary table, which was the correct place for the Luna's unmarried younger sister who held no pack title, and she ate with steady attention because she had not eaten since morning, and she refused to be the kind of woman who starved herself through misery. One of the kitchen girls, a tiny wolf pup named Ressa, who had attached herself to Marin 6 months ago when Marin had defended her from a butler with an ugly temper, appeared at her elbow with a second helping of braised venison, and didn't say anything, just set it down and patted Marin's shoulder once with a small warm hand. "You did well," Ressa said. She was 19 and had a scar through her left eyebrow from a training accident she refused to discuss, and she always smelled faintly of cardamom from the spice racks she restocked every morning. The train never touched the floor. It wasn't supposed to. I watched. Most people would have let it drag at the steps. Marin looked at her. "You were watching me?" Ressa blinked as if this were obvious. "Wasn't everyone?" No. No one was watching Marin. That was the entire point of Marin. She said, "Thank you for the venison," and Ressa dissolved back into the crowd with the ease of someone who had spent years perfecting the same skill Marin had. They understood each other, those two. The Alpha King sat at the high table beside her sister. Marin could see them both from her angle, Celestine bright and animated, holding court with the 7 pack lords who ringed them like a constellation orbiting twin suns, and Calum Voss quiet beside her, answering when addressed, raising his cup at intervals, performing the role with the clean efficiency of a man who had spent his whole life performing roles. He turned his head. Their eyes met across the hall. Marin looked away first. Her heart was doing something embarrassing in her chest, and she addressed this problem by eating more venison. The first week after the coronation was a week of court, which meant a week of ceremonies Marin was required to attend and not be noticed at. The pack lords' formal oaths, the trade negotiations with the Eastern Territories, the public hunt where the new Luna was presented to the outer packs, and the Alpha King ran point beside her, and every wolf in the valley scented their joined authority. Marin did not run the hunt. She was not a strong enough wolf for the ceremonial role, which required the Luna's female relatives within the 3rd degree, and her sister had very quietly had that clause removed from the ceremony program before it was printed. Marin had found out from Ressa, who had found out from the ceremony master, who had seemed to think it was odd enough to mention. Marin had said, "That's fine," and had meant it, again, and had gone to the kitchens and helped Ressa inventory the winter spice stores, and tried not to think about it. The second thing she had tried not to think about was simpler and more immediate. Every time she was in the same room as the Alpha King, he found her. Not dramatically, not with pursuit or declaration, just his eyes in a crowd, migrating to her corner with the patient inevitability of water finding low ground. She started cataloging it, because she was the kind of woman who cataloged things when she was unsettled and didn't know what else to do with herself. At the oath ceremony, twice, at the first trade negotiation, where she sat in the gallery with the other non-participating court members, once, at the beginning, and then again near the end when Lord Aldrich of the Eastern Pax was making a point about toll routes, and the Alpha King's eyes had drifted from the Lord's face to the gallery and settled on Marin for 3 full seconds before he looked back. At the formal dinner on the 3rd night, 4 times, and one of those times Celestine had been speaking to him. She started sitting in different corners. He found her in those too. She told herself this was surveillance. He was an Alpha King. He read rooms for threat assessments. That was what alphas did. She was an unfamiliar face at his court, a variable he hadn't catalogued. Once he decided she was harmless, he would stop. She told herself this with great conviction, standing at the window of her room on the 5th night, watching the courtyard below where a training yard had been set up for the honor guard's morning drills. The Alpha King was down there in plain clothes, gray linen, no crown, boots that had seen actual use, working through sword forms with a practice blade. Alone. It was past midnight. The courtyard torches threw his shadow long and angular across the flagstones. He stopped, looked up. She stepped back from the window. She was not fast enough. The wound happened on the 7th day. One of the young pack lords, Lord Brennan's second son, a wolf named Darren who was 23 and had the particular swagger of young men who have been told their whole lives that they are exceptional, had challenged the honor guard captain to a sparring match in the morning yard, and the match had gotten out of hand in the way these things did when testosterone and territorial pride were involved, and the captain had put Darren down hard on the flagstones. Darren had gotten up bloody and smiling, because he was not a bad man, just young. And then he had stepped wrong on the dismount, and there had been a sound and a curse, and then Darren was sitting in the dust, holding his wrist in both hands. Marin happened to be crossing the courtyard. She had been on her way to the herb stores for Ressa, who was planning a spiced wine for the evening meal, and had run short of dried juniper, and she had her basket over one arm, and she stopped. She was not the healer. The court healer was a man named Aussie who wore spectacles and smelled perpetually of camphor, and was competent and busy. But Aussie was across the keep in the medical ward, and Darren was right in front of her, and the wrist was at an angle that made her own bones hurt to look at. "Sit still," she said, and knelt beside him in the dust without waiting for his permission, and set down her basket, and took his wrist in both hands with the careful, deliberate pressure she had learned from 3 years of helping her mother treat pack injuries when the healer was traveling. Darren hissed. Then he looked down at her and said, "You're the Luna's sister." "I am." "I don't need—" "You have a partial fracture of the distal radius," she said. It's not displaced, which is lucky because if it were, I couldn't help you and you'd have to wait for Aussie. As it is, I can splint it well enough to get you there without making it worse." She looked up at him. "Or I can leave you sitting in the dust. Either one." Darren shut his mouth. She was pulling the bark splints from her basket. She kept them there from habit, from the years of tending her mother's people. When she became aware of a change in the air. The courtyard had gone quiet. A particular quiet. The kind that meant the room's apex predator had entered it. She did not look up. What happened? Not a question. The Alpha King's voice was low and even and carried the particular flat quality of someone who had trained themselves out of audible irritation long ago. She could smell him now that he was close. That winter river scent, iron and cold water, and something underneath it she couldn't immediately name. Something darker and warmer that she filed away for later consideration. "Training injury," the honor guard captain said, from somewhere to her left. "Lord Brennan's son, my king. The Lady Marin is... I can see what she's doing." A pause. Marin fitted the first splint against Darren's wrist and began winding the binding strip. And she could feel the Alpha King's attention on the back of her neck like a second sun. "You have training," the king said. To her. "My mother's pack had a traveling healer," she said. "I learned to cover for him." "Your mother's pack is Greyvein." It was. She tied off the first knot. "She died 4 years ago." Silence. Different quality. Not the silence of an alpha parsing a room for threats. Something else. Something softer at the edges. She still didn't look up. She tied the second knot and released Darren's wrist with careful precision. "That will hold until you reach Aussie," she said. "Don't put weight on it. Don't shift. Your wolf form will make the displacement worse." Darren said, "Thank you," with the slightly dazed tone of someone who expected dismissal and received competence instead. She stood, dusted the courtyard grit from her knees, and finally looked at the Alpha King. He was closer than she expected. Close enough that she could see the actual color of his eyes, which she had not managed before. Not black, as she'd thought, but a very deep gray-green, the color of river water in autumn. Close enough that the undertone in his scent resolved into something clear, pine sap and wood smoke, warm where the winter river was cold. The two things layered in a way that made her think of a fire built in an open doorway. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Lady Marin," he said. She had not expected him to know her name. The surprise must have shown. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, close enough to qualify. "My king," she said, and picked up her basket, and walked away, because her heart was behaving very badly, and she needed to put distance between herself and the source of the problem. She did not hear him say anything else. She did not look back. She found out later, from Ressa, that he had stood watching the path she'd taken for a full 2 minutes after she left. She avoided him. She was good at it. She had spent most of her life being good at it, at making herself peripheral, at choosing routes through the keep that took her past the service halls and the lesser corridors, rather than the staterooms and the formal paths where Alpha Kings walked. The keep was large enough. She could be invisible in it. On the 10th day after the coronation, her sister summoned her. Celestine's rooms were in the East Tower now, the Luna's suite, 6 rooms that looked out over the Ashenvale Valley and smelled of the gardenias the staff kept in fresh water for her daily. The gardenias were Celestine's requirement, not the court's. She had made it clear in her first week that she expected them, and the staff had made it clear they would provide them. And so the East Tower now always smelled of heavy white flowers and the subtle iron of Celestine's authority. Marin knocked. "Enter." Celestine was at her writing desk, which she used mostly for correspondence that reinforced her social position rather than administrative work, and she looked up at Marin the way she always looked at her, that particular glance that took inventory and found nothing of note. "Sit." Marin sat. "I've been hearing things," Celestine said. She set down her pen. She had beautiful hands, long-fingered, always immaculate, and she had a habit of folding them together on the desk in front of her when she wanted to appear in control of a conversation. They were folded now. "About you and the Alpha King. There is nothing to hear. You treated Lord Brennan's son in the courtyard and Calum watched. Lord Brennan's son needed splinting and the healer was across the keep." Celestine's eyes were pale blue, the color of early morning sky, and they were very still. "You know that drawing the king's attention is not appropriate for someone in your position. I was treating an injury. You were performing in front of him." The word landed wrong. Marin looked at her sister, really looked, the way she didn't often let herself, because looking at Celestine with clear eyes was uncomfortable, and said, "I didn't know he was there until he was already standing next to me. He is always watching the courtyard from the West Hall window at that hour." Celestine's voice was even, patient, the patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. "I am aware of his habits. You should be too." Marin was quiet for a moment. The gardenias were very sweet. Too sweet. She thought, "She is telling me she knows where he is at every hour." She thought, "She is telling me I should structure my movements around his." She thought, "I have been doing this already, but in the wrong direction." She said, "I'll be more careful." Celestine nodded, unfolded her hands, picked up her pen. "Good. You can go." Marin went. In the corridor outside the East Tower, she stood with her back against the cold stone wall and breathed the plain keep smell, dust and dog and torch smoke, the honest smell of an old building, until the gardenia scent cleared from her nose, and then she walked to the window at the end of the corridor and looked out over the valley. She was not crying. She had not cried about Celestine in 2 years, which was approximately when she had stopped being surprised by her. What she was tired, and tired was manageable. The wound that locked them together was not Darren's wrist. That was only the opening. On the 14th day after the coronation, the Alpha King went into the Wolfwood alone. He did this once a week, Ressa told her, had been doing it for years. The honor guard knew not to follow. It was his private ritual, his time in wolf form without the weight of crown and court and obligation, and everyone in Ashenvale Keep understood it the way they understood breathing. It happened. It was necessary. It was not discussed. Except this time he came back differently. He came back on 2 feet, walking. And the way he was walking was wrong. Marin saw him from the kitchen courtyard where she was helping Ressa hang bundles of late-harvest herbs to dry, and she saw it before she consciously identified it. He was favoring his left side. Not limping. He was too controlled for a limp, but the lean was there. The slight list toward the right that meant the left side of his body was carrying pain. She should have gone back to her herbs. She watched him cross the outer courtyard toward the keep's east entrance. He was alone. His honor guard would pick him up inside. He stopped once, at the base of the keep steps, and pressed his left hand flat against the stone wall, and his head dropped forward, and she could see, even at this distance, that the hand was wet. She was across the courtyard before she had consciously decided to move. "You're hurt." He straightened immediately, turned to face her with the absolute controlled speed of an alpha, whose instincts said never show weakness in any direction, and she saw the flash of something in his face. Not pain. Something more complicated, something closer to caught. and then the expression smoothed back to neutral. Lady Marin, your left side. She was already close enough to smell it. Blood, metallic and sharp over the cold water base of his scent, and something else underneath, wrong in a way that made her wolf sense prickle. Not infection, too soon for that. But something acrid, chemical. Not a clean wound. What happened? A beat. She had the impression of a man calculating how much to spend. Thornwood bramble, he said. The eastern run has grown over the border marks. Thornwood bramble doesn't bleed like that. She was looking at his shirt now, at the dark bloom spreading from his left side through the gray linen, and she did not ask permission, she just said, inside. Now. The healer's ward or your rooms. Your choice. But we're not doing this in the courtyard. He looked at her. She looked back. My rooms, he said. And something in the way he said it, quieter than his court voice, the performance stripped out, made her understand that he did not want the healer. He did not want witnesses. He did not want the particular vulnerability of letting the keep know their alpha king had come home hurt. She understood that. She understood that in her bones. All right, she said. The Alpha King's private rooms were on the 3rd floor, north-facing, which meant they received the hard, cold light that Marin privately preferred to the East Tower's soft morning gold. They were larger than she'd imagined, and emptier. Not sparse, exactly, but stripped of the performative wealth that filled most of the staterooms. A bed with good wool blankets. A desk absolutely covered in documents and correspondence. One bookshelf, badly organized, books pushed in at angles that suggested they were read rather than displayed. On the windowsill, a single chess piece, a white rook, standing alone, and she noticed it and filed it away without knowing why it mattered. He sat where she pointed, the chair near the window, not the bed, and she appreciated that he didn't make it strange, just sat and began to unfasten his shirt with the methodical care of a man working around pain. She got her basket open. She had it with her. She still had the herb-gathering habit, the basket always near. She laid out what she had: clean linen strips, the pouch of powdered golden seal, the stoppered vial of yarrow oil, the small knife she used for cutting and nothing else. Take the shirt off, she said. Professional. Steady. He did. She had one moment, just one, she permitted herself that. To register that he was extraordinary to look at, in the way that had nothing to do with symmetry. He had old scars. 3 across the ribs, parallel lines that had healed silver clean. The marks of claws from a fight far enough in the past that they'd finished telling their story. A burn scar along his right shoulder, round and deliberate, the kind made by a brand rather than an accident. She had not expected the brand. She absorbed it, catalogued it, moved on. The current wound was along his left side, a long, shallow cut that had caught something in the muscle beneath, and it had the characteristic pink-purple bruising of a silver-touched blade, which was why it wasn't closing on its own the way a wolf's wounds should. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing. You can say it, he said. Someone cut you with a silver-laced blade in your own wolfwood. She began cleaning the wound, efficiently, not gently but not carelessly either. His breath came out in a slow, controlled rush. That is not a thornwood bramble. No. Does your guard know? Silence that answered. Calum. She used his name without thinking, without the title, and felt him go very still under her hands. If someone with a silver blade had access to the Alpha King in the Wolfwood, I'm handling it. You're bleeding through handling it. Lady Marin. His voice was even, lower than usual. Marin, she said. Just Marin. If we're going to be alone in your rooms while I pick silver contamination out of a knife wound, you can manage my first name. A pause. Then, Marin. She had not expected it to sound like that, like something being set down carefully. She focused on the wound and the golden seal and the careful work of her hands, and she did not allow herself to read anything into the way he said her name, because she was sensible. She was practical. She was the sister in the corner who held the train. The work took 40 minutes. He held still the entire time. The absolute, disciplined stillness of a man who had learned to endure pain without performing it. And the only evidence of what it cost him was the slow white of his knuckles against the chair arm and, once, when she pressed deeper to clear the contamination, the brief shutting of his eyes. When she finished, she tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels and looked at him. "Who knew you ran that route?" she said. He was looking at something past her shoulder, the particular unfocused look of a man following a thought through to a conclusion he didn't like. His jaw worked. That gesture she'd catalogued at the coronation, the tell he probably didn't know he had. "Too many people," he said. "Then narrow it." "I said I'm handling it." "I know." She stood, repacked her basket, didn't argue, because she had learned long ago that arguing with men like this was like arguing with stone walls. She understood the physics. She just had to choose her points of contact. The wound needs redressing tomorrow, and the next day. Silver contamination in the muscle takes 3 days to clear fully. He looked at her then, direct, unhidden. "You'll come back," he said. And it was not quite a question and not quite a command. It was something in between that she didn't have a name for. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Before the court sessions. No one will think anything of it." She picked up her basket and left, and managed to hold her breathing even all the way down the corridor and around the corner and into the servants' stair, before she sat down on the step, with her back against the cold wall, and let herself have 30 seconds of not being composed. The bond. She hadn't thought about the bond. In a world of fated mates and pack magic, the bond was something every wolf knew about. The thing the oldest stories called the recognition. The moment two wolves who were made for each other came within range of the truth. She was not so foolish as to think that 40 minutes of wound care was recognition. She was not so foolish as to think that a man who had just crowned her sister as his Luna would feel recognition for anyone else. But there was something in the way he said her name. She stayed on the step for her 30 seconds. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and went to find Ressa and tell her the herb hanging would have to wait until tomorrow. She came back the next morning, and the morning after that. The third morning, the wound was clearing, the ugly silver bruise fading from purple to yellow at the edges, the muscle beginning to close the way wolf muscles did when the inhibitor was gone, and she was repacking her basket when he said, without preamble, without looking up from the correspondence he'd been reviewing across the room, "My mother was from the Gray Vein pack." She stilled. "She died when I was 9, he said. "Fever in the 3rd year of the long winter. The traveling healer couldn't reach us in time." He turned one page, turned it back. "I did not know the Gray Vein pack produced healers." "My mother trained herself," Marin said carefully. "After the pack's healer left for the cities. She said it was impractical to wait for someone else to know what she needed to know." He looked up at her over the correspondence. "Yes," he said. "Simple. The way you say yes to something true." She thought. He did not tell me this as small talk. He told me this because the wound healed and the silver cleared and whatever equilibrium he'd been maintaining while she worked on him had shifted into something else. And this was the thing he offered in its place. A fragment of himself, specific and personal, laid down without ceremony. She thought, "I should be careful." She thought, "I am going to be very bad at being careful. My sister will be expecting me," she said. Your sister is meeting with the Eastern Pack Lords until midday. He said it without emphasis, without implication, just a fact offered cleanly. Then, after a pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something, "You don't have to go." She stood in his room with her basket over her arm, and the morning light coming through the north windows cold and honest, and she looked at him looking at her, and she said, "What would we do instead?" He reached across the desk, past the correspondence, and picked up the white rook from the windowsill. "Do you play?" he said. She played chess badly and knew it. She told him so at the start, and he nodded and set the pieces up and destroyed her systematically in 11 moves, and then, without being asked, set the pieces up again and spent an hour showing her the move she'd missed at the 3rd turn, and then the move she'd missed at the 6th, and then the deeper principle underneath both of them, which he explained with a patience she hadn't expected from a man the court described as cold. She won the 2nd game. Barely. She was fairly certain he let her, but she couldn't find the moment he'd done it, which was its own kind of gift. "You play as if the pieces in the center don't matter," he said, studying the board. "As if you're protecting the edges. The edges are where the surprise comes from." He looked at her. That look again. The unhidden one. The one that had no court performance in it. "Yes," he said. "They are." She went home to her room and sat on her bed and pressed her hands flat on her knees and thought, "This is not going to be all right." She told Ressa. Not everything, not the chess, not the thing he'd said about the edges, but the shape of it, the wound, the dressing, the morning visits, the conversation. Ressa listened with her arms folded over her apron and her scarred eyebrow slightly raised, and when Marin finished, Risa said, "He's asking you back. For wound care. The wound is clearing. He says it's not fully..." "Marin." Ressa put her hand over Marin's. Her fingers were always warm, always faintly cardamom-scented, and Marin felt the comfort of it like a plank underfoot in deep water. "The Alpha King of 9 Packs has a dedicated medical ward with 3 trained healers. He is not asking you back for wound care." Marin was quiet. "And Celestine," Ressa began. "I know. She watches you. I know. More than she lets on." Ressa's voice was careful now, choosing its steps. "I work in the kitchens. I hear things. The staff talks. She has been asking the chambermaids, asking the page boys, where you go in the mornings." The gardenia smell came back to Marin, imaginary, memory sharp. "Since when?" "Since the courtyard, when she heard he watched you treat Lord Brennan's son." Marin looked at her hands. She thought about the word performing, which Celestine had used, and how it had landed wrong, and now she understood why. Because Celestine had meant it as an accusation, but it was also a fear. Her sister, the crowned Luna of the realm, was afraid, and Celestine frightened was a Celestine worth watching. "She won't do anything overt," Marin said, mostly to herself. "She doesn't need to." Ressa's voice was very quiet. "She just needs to mention to the right people, in the right way, that her little sister has been making early morning visits to the Alpha King's rooms." The word fell like a stone into still water. Marin felt the rings spreading. "They'd dismiss me from court," she said. Or worse, depending on how she frames it. Ressa squeezed her hand. "I'm not telling you to stop. I'm telling you to know what you're walking into." Marin sat with that for a long moment. She thought about the white rook on the windowsill, the chessboard, the way he had explained the principle beneath the move, not the move itself, the principle, the deeper pattern, because she was smart enough to use it and he had seen that. She thought about the look on his face when she'd said the edges are where the surprise comes from. I know what I'm walking into, she said. She was wrong. She didn't. Not yet. The realization about Celestine came in stages, the way most terrible recognitions do. Not all at once, not in a flash, but through accumulation. Each piece small enough to explain away until there were too many pieces to ignore. Stage 1 was the Northern Lord. Lord Aldrich of the Eastern Territories had a son, Petra, 26 and sharp-faced, and the kind of handsome that knew it was handsome. And he had been watching Marin since the coronation, in the way that she recognized as interest, but which she had been too busy and too distracted to pay attention to. He had brought her a book of Ashenvale border maps that she had mentioned in passing was hard to find, and he had done it with a smile, and without making it a negotiation, and she had thought, he is kind. She had thought, maybe this is what ordinary looks like. He had asked her to walk with him in the keep's outer garden on the 20th day after the coronation, and she had said yes, because Ressa's warning was in her mind, and walking with a young lord in an outer garden was visible and harmless and safe. She heard about what happened the next day from Ressa, who heard it from one of the East Tower maids, who heard it from Celestine herself. Celestine had gone to Lord Aldrich, privately. She had mentioned, in the warm, confidential tone that was her sharpest weapon, that she was worried about her sister, who had lately been developing an inappropriate fixation on the Alpha King that was causing some concern, and that perhaps it would be kind of Lord Aldrich and his son to step gently back from encouraging her, as encouragement would only confuse her further. Petra had brought no more books. She used you, Ressa said, very quietly. She used him, Marin said. To keep me. She stopped. Ressa waited. To keep me visible, Marin said slowly, working it through. If I'm seen publicly encouraging another man, and she's already seeding the story that I'm fixated on Calum, on the king, then any of his continued attention toward me looks like a problem of my making. My obsession. His inconvenience. Ressa pressed her lips together and said nothing, which was its own answer. Stage 2 was the Pack Lords' meeting. She had not been invited. She was not supposed to know it happened. But she had been in the corridor outside the south receiving room, bringing a medicinal preparation Aussie the healer had asked her to deliver, and the door had not been fully closed, and she had heard Celestine's voice clearly, warm and controlled, and the phrase that came through was, "My sister has always had difficulty with appropriate boundaries." She did not hear what came before or after. She stood in the corridor with the preparation in her hands and breathed very carefully through her nose, and what she smelled through the gap in the door was Celestine's gardenia and cold steel scent, and Lord Brennan's oak and irritation, and, fainter, deeper, distinct, the pine and cold river of the Alpha King, present and listening. She left. She went to the kitchen garden and sat on the stone bench under the winter bare rosemary bushes, and looked at the sky until she felt cold enough that the numbness was useful rather than frightening. Stage 3 was the document. She found it by accident, truly, genuinely by accident, which she recognized was the kind of thing that was impossible to explain to anyone who already disbelieved you, and so she never tried. She was in the correspondence room, which any court member could access to leave letters for the keep's post riders, and a document had slipped from the stack on the sorting table, and she picked it up to replace it, and she saw her own name, a formal complaint to the Pack Council, dated 4 days from now, still being prepared. Her name, and then a series of accusations, that she had been using unauthorized access to the Alpha King's private chambers, that she had been administering unsupervised medicinal preparations, that she had been interfering with the Luna's court duties by distracting members of the honor guard and political allies. The language was careful and legal and completely, precisely devastating. The signature was in Celestine's handwriting. Below it, a second signature, partially finished. She recognized the hand. Lord Brennan, the most senior pack lord, whose approval would give the complaint the weight to trigger a formal council hearing. Her sister was going to have her expelled from court, possibly from the keep entirely, and she had spent 4 weeks laying the ground for it. Marin set the document back on the pile. She walked out of the correspondence room. She went to her own room and sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall, and she thought about her mother, who had trained herself to heal because it was impractical to wait for someone else to know what she needed to know. She thought about the white rook on the windowsill. She thought about what she was going to do. She went to him. Not in the morning, not through the careful early-hour visits. She went that afternoon, when the court sessions were still running and the corridors were full enough to be anonymous, and she knocked on his door, and when he said, "Enter," she went in and stood in the middle of the room and said, without preamble, "I need to tell you something, and then I need you to listen before you respond, because I know how this is going to sound, and I know that you have no reason to believe me over your Luna, and I know that I am the one who looks like the problem in this situation. But I found something, and I cannot unknow it, and I am not willing to pretend I didn't see it." He had risen when she entered. He was standing now, the desk between them, and his face was closed the way it always was in the moments before he decided how much to let her see. "Sit," he said. "I'd rather stand." "Marin," the name in his voice, careful and deliberate. "Sit down." She sat. He came around the desk and took the chair across from her, closer than the desk had allowed, and he rested his forearms on his knees and looked at her with the full weight of his attention, unmediated by court or crown or the performance of leadership. She told him. All of it. Ressa's warning, Lord Aldrich, the corridor outside the receiving room, the document on the sorting table. She told it in order and without embellishment, only the facts, the way her mother had taught her to give a medical account. What? When? Where? In sequence. Because sequence was where truth lived and drama was what happened when you let yourself add color. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, there was a silence that had texture, dense and careful, the kind of silence that means a man is holding something in. "The document," he said. "I put it back. You didn't take it. It's not mine to take." His jaw worked. There was that gesture, the tell, the one she'd catalogued at the coronation. And she understood now that it meant he was angry and choosing not to be angry in front of her, which was its own kind of thing. "She's been moving pieces for weeks," he said. Quiet. Matter of fact. Not a question. "Yes. I have been..." He stopped. Started again. "I have not been looking in the right place," she thought. He knew something was wrong. She thought. He's been watching for a threat from outside and it was inside all along. She thought. I should have seen this faster. My own blind spot, always willing to explain away cruelty from the people close to me. "I came to tell you," she said, "because you deserve to know, not because I want anything from you." She said this clearly, and she meant it. "I'll leave Ashenvale if I need to. That is my decision to make, not yours. But the silver blade in the wolfwood, and the document, and Celestine, these things are connected, and you should know." He was very still. "The blade," he said. "The eastern run that's grown over the border marks. You've been running the same route for years." She looked at him steadily. "Who gave you that route?" The stillness became something else. She watched the pieces move behind his eyes the way chess pieces move when a good player sees 3 turns ahead. "My Luna," he said. Flat. Absolutely flat. "I don't know that," she said immediately. "I'm asking." She asked me 2 weeks before the coronation about my wolfwood habits. She said, his voice stopped. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, a gesture she'd never seen from him, uncontrolled and therefore significant. She said she wanted to be able to find me if there was ever an emergency. The silence in the room was very heavy. "Calum," she said, soft, careful. "Don't." His voice was rough now, the court polish stripped entirely. "Don't be kind about it." "I'm not being kind. I'm being accurate. This isn't certain yet." "No." He stood. He moved to the window, his back to her, and stood looking out over the North Valley with his hands locked behind his back. "But I am a man who has spent 2 years evaluating threats to this pack, and I can feel the shape of what I should have seen 3 months ago." A pause. "She is not. She chose this position. She sought it. I chose her for her reputation and her lineage, and I did not look for what else she might want." Marin stood too. She moved to stand beside him at the window, not quite at his shoulder, giving him the space to not be looked at directly while she said the next thing. "She is very good at showing people what they expect to see," she said. "She has practiced it for a long time. You are not the first." He turned his head to look at her. "You," he said. "Me," she agreed. "My whole life." They stood at the north window in the cold afternoon light, and outside the wolfwood was a dark line at the valley's edge, and somewhere in it there was a route cleared by silver blade work that Marin was now very sure had been meant to become useful for something worse than a single wound. "I need proof before I move against her," he said. "I know. If I act without proof, it becomes, the pack lords will split. Brennan is already half committed to the complaint she's filing. I know that too." She had been thinking about this since the corridor. What you need is for her to show herself, not be shown. Her instinct, when she feels threatened, is to move faster and harder. If she thinks her position is secure but the plan is slipping, she'll do something visible. He finished the thought with her, and she heard in his voice that this was how he thought. Not ahead of the problem, but through it, tracing force vectors the way she traced the path of silver through muscle tissue. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The white rook was on the windowsill between them, and she realized it was always there, always in the same place, not decoration, anchor. And she thought she understood finally what it was for. "You are not what I expected," he said. "I know. No one expects me." "That's their failure." She felt that land in her chest and did not move, did not let it show. She said, "What do you need me to do?" What he needed was for her to be visible. Not in the way Celestine had made her visible. As a problem. A peripheral embarrassment. A cautionary note. Visibly present at court events she had been quietly edged away from. Present at the chess table in the East Library, where the pack lord's senior advisors gathered in the evenings. Present at the morning council briefings in the outer chamber, which any court member of sufficient rank could attend, and a pack lord's daughter by birth, even a secondary one, qualified. She understood what this was. Bait. She agreed to it with open eyes. She was not a passive woman. She was a woman who had spent a long time pretending to be one, and there was a difference. The first evening in the East Library, 3 of the senior advisors, 2 junior pack lords, and Calum at the head of the table with the chessboard set up to one side, because this was a meeting that had the chessboard as cover. She took the chair at the table's far end, which was her instinct, the corner, the edge, and then she did not take it. She took the chair at his left hand instead, which was empty, and she sat in it as if she had every right to be there. Lord Brennan's senior advisor, a man named Culver who had the permanent expression of a man smelling something unpleasant, looked at her, looked at the king, said nothing. Calum said, without looking up from the board he was resetting, Lady Marin has been assisting Aussie in reviewing the court's winter medical preparations. I've asked her to present her recommendations to the council next week. This was true. Aussie had been delighted to have the help. The recommendations were real and thorough and genuinely useful. Culver said, in a tone that meant he was storing this for later. She played chess that evening with one of the junior lords, a boy of 20 who was ambitious and improving, and much better than she was, and she enjoyed losing to him, and she spent most of the game watching the room through her peripheral vision, and learning everything she could about who spoke to whom and who went silent when, and she gave the information to Ressa afterward, and Ressa gave it to the kitchen network she had cultivated over 6 years of being small and quiet, and overlooked in a place full of people who had never bothered to learn her name. The invisible people in a great house always know more than the visible ones. Marin had known this her whole life. She had just never weaponized it before. The jealousy moment came from a direction she didn't see coming, which was perhaps the point of such moments. It was Darren, young Lord Brennan's son, the wrist, the courtyard, who had taken to following her around the keep with the devoted attention of a large, well-meaning dog. He was genuinely grateful, she thought, and also genuinely interested, and also completely, blissfully unaware of the political landscape he was navigating, which was both his charm and his danger. He brought her things, interesting stones from the Wolfwood, a packet of unusual dried herbs from the eastern markets, a handwritten copy of a Grey Vein pack song he'd found in the keep library, because she had mentioned once, in passing, that she'd grown up with her mother's pack songs. She couldn't be unkind to him. He was too earnest. He reminded her of Ressa. That quality of straightforward warmth that didn't need anything back from her, was just offered freely. On the third evening of her new visible presence in the East Library, Darren appeared with the Grey Vein song, and sat beside her, and began explaining, with great animation, how he'd found it cross-referenced in 3 different historical texts, and she leaned over to look at the handwritten copy, and said something about the 3rd verse being a winter version she hadn't known existed, and she was smiling, genuinely, because the song brought her mother back in a clean way that didn't hurt. She heard the chessboard move, not a piece, the whole board, shifted sharply, a sound of wood on wood, and then a controlled stillness. She looked up. Across the room, Calum was at the chess table with Culver, and the board had shifted because his hand had hit it, and his hand had hit it because he was looking at her and Darren, at Darren's shoulder against hers, at the handwritten page between them, at her smile. His expression was neutral, absolutely neutral. The court face, the coin face, the one that gave nothing. His scent was not neutral. Even across the library she caught the edge of it. Something hot and sharp layering through the cold water base. Something with teeth. She knew that scent. Every wolf knew that scent. It was the smell of a predator who has just located the thing he considers his, and found it in unexpected proximity to someone else. Culver said something. Calum answered. His eyes stayed on her for 3 more seconds, then moved away with the controlled deliberateness of a man choosing where to look. She turned back to Darren and the winter song. Her pulse was very loud in her own ears. She said later to Ressa, "He is not mine to want." Ressa, stirring the evening spice wine, said, "Tell me that again in a week." Celestine moved on the 28th day. Marin had expected it to be the document, the formal complaint, filed with Brennan's signature, triggering the council hearing. She had been ready for that. What came instead was dinner, a formal state dinner, all 9 pack lords and their senior representatives, hosted by the Luna in the Great Hall. Marin was invited. That alone was strange. Celestine had not invited her to any of the formal dinners since the coronation. She wore her best dress, the dark green wool with the copper threadwork at the collar that had been their mother's, and she sat in the place assigned to her, which was, she realized only when she arrived, directly adjacent to Lord Brennan. She sat down. She smiled. She began a polite conversation about border trade policy because Lord Brennan was interested in border trade policy, and she had read everything she could find on it in the 2 weeks since this started. Halfway through the second course, Celestine stood and offered a toast. Her voice was warm and clear and effortlessly commanding, and what she said was, she was grateful for the Pack Lord's loyalty and for the wonderful family support she had received during the coronation transition, and that it reminded her what a gift it was to have sisters. Everyone looked at Marin. That was the intention, that warm, specific look, everyone turning to see the Luna's beloved younger sister, the family support, the wholesome presence at the corner of the table. Marin smiled and raised her glass. She tasted something wrong, not in the wine, in the air, in the compositional scent of the room, in the particular combination of Celestine's Triumph musk and something older and darker that Marin's mother would have called wrongness, the smell of a trap that was already closed. She looked at her glass. The wine was a pale gold she didn't recognize, not the keep's usual vintage, something imported, something special for the occasion. She looked up and found Ressa across the room, Ressa who was serving this evening, Ressa who was looking at her with an expression that did not belong on Ressa's face. Fear. Marin set down the glass. She reached for the water instead, smooth and unremarkable, and she looked at Ressa and made a small, careful motion with her fingers. An old servant's signal, the kind that passed between kitchen staff, that she had learned years ago. Stay close. Ressa moved, small, precise, unobtrusive. She circled the room and positioned herself near the door that led to the service corridor, and she was there when Marin excused herself 7 minutes later with a quiet mention of the powder room, and they were in the service corridor with the door closed when Marin said, low and urgent, "The wine." "I didn't pour it," Ressa said. Her face was bloodless under her warmth. "My king. He's been served from the same carafe as you." Marin's heart stopped for one full beat. "Where is he sitting?" "Head of the table. He's already had 1 glass." She was already moving. She came back into the great hall through the main doors, not the service entrance, which meant she came through the visible part of the room, which meant 60 people watched her cross the floor to the head of the table in her mother's dark green dress, with her hands perfectly steady and her face completely calm. She reached Calum's place setting. He was mid-sentence with Lord Aldrich on his right. He saw her coming and stopped, and the particular quality of his attention shifted into something alert and waiting. She picked up his glass. Both glasses, his dinner glass, and the fresh pour the server had just brought. She held them and looked at him and said, very quietly, for him alone, "Don't." He read her face. It took him 1 second. Then he looked at the glasses, looked at her, and said nothing. "My king," Lord Aldrich said, in the tone of a man addressing an inexplicable interruption. "Excuse us," Calum said. They went into the private antechamber off the great hall, and Marin set the glasses on the side table, and she stood in the middle of the room and said, "Someone needs to test the wine before you touch it again." "What's in it?" Flat, not surprised. "I don't know. I need Aussie." She looked at him. "I shouldn't have touched the glasses. Evidence." "You prioritized the right thing." He was already at the door, summoning the honor guard with a word and a look, and she heard the low, efficient movement of men who had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment and were very good at it. The wine was tested. Aussie arrived within 7 minutes, pale and serious, and he used the testing kit he kept in the medical ward for this specific kind of political eventualities, which were more common in an alpha's court than anyone liked to admit, and the result was wolfsbane extract, high concentration, mixed with an Eastern sweetener that would have covered the bitterness in a gold-colored wine paired with game. Wolfsbane didn't kill a grown alpha, not usually, but it disrupted shift, disrupted clarity, disrupted the bond sense that was an alpha's deepest protection, and a disrupted, half-shifted alpha king in a room full of pack lords was a vulnerability that anyone sufficiently positioned and sufficiently ruthless could exploit. The silver blade. Then this. The shape of it. Finally complete. Caleb moved fast and quietly, which she was learning was how he moved when the anger was real rather than performed. He had the honor guard seal the kitchen, recall all the serving staff, and request the formal presence of all 9 pack lords in the council chamber within the hour. No explanation given, which was explanation enough to men who read power the way wolves read wind. He had one of the guards return the wine glasses to evidence. He had Aussie document everything in the healer's formal register. He said to Marin, when they were for one moment alone in the antechamber, "How did you know?" "I smelled it," she said. Under the excitement musk in the room there was something chemical, wrongness. My mother called it that. Wrongness. The smell of something that's been altered. Your wolf sense is... He stopped. Strong in some directions, she said. Weak in others. I can read a room of scent signatures better than almost anyone. I can't run a pack hunt worth anything. Your sister can run a pack hunt. Yes. He was quiet. His jaw worked. She had come to understand over these weeks that the jaw work meant he was holding an anger he'd decided not to release, and the deciding was what cost him. You knew she was this, he said. And it was not accusation. It was grief, which surprised her, because she had not expected grief from him. Not the extent of it, but the kind of person she was. You knew. I knew she was capable of cruelty, Marin said carefully. I didn't know she'd extend it here. Why didn't you? He stopped again. Tell you? She held his gaze. You had just crowned her, and I'm the sister in the corner. You had no reason to take my word over a woman the entire realm had been praising for 20 years. I would have. You wouldn't have, she said. Not hard, not accusing, just the fact. Not then. You needed to see it yourself. He was very still. She thought she had gone too far, and then she thought, no, this is accurate, and he knows it's accurate, and men like him, men who are genuinely good at what they do, don't flinch from accurate. Yes, he said. Simple. The way he'd said it the morning he told her about his mother. She exhaled. What happens now? She said. Now, he said. I go into the council chamber and I present what we have, and I call a formal inquiry, and I face what I chose and what it cost. A pause. What I should have. His jaw worked one more time. Then he let it go, visibly. A choice made in real time. I'll ask Lord Brennan to withdraw the complaint against you before anything else is said. It will be the first thing, before any charges. You don't have to do that. I very much do. His eyes met hers, clear and direct and entirely without the court performance. Marin, I very much do. She thought, I am going to love you. She thought, I already do, and have for a while, and that is terrifying. She thought, now is not the time for any of this. Go, she said. I'll be here. I know, he said. and he left. The council took 4 hours. She spent them with Ressa in the kitchen garden, wrapped in her mother's shawl against the night cold, drinking the spiced wine that had been safely made in a separate pot, and tasting of cardamom and winter pear. Ressa talked. Comfortable, ordinary talk about the kitchen preparations for the frost feast next month. About the new page boy who had attached himself to the head cook and was showing promise. About a letter she'd received from her own mother in the Southern Territories. And Marin listened and felt the specific gratitude of being known. When the door to the inner keep opened, she knew by the quality of the sound, not the quick exit of an adjourned meeting, but the slow, specific exit of men carrying something heavy and trying to carry it with dignity. Ressa squeezed her hand and went inside. Marin stayed in the garden. He found her there. Of course he did. He crossed the garden without a lamp, which he didn't need, and he sat on the stone bench beside her and said nothing for a long moment, and she let the nothing exist. And it had the same texture as the nothing in his rooms on the first morning, dense and careful, and full of things being decided. "She's been taken to her rooms under guard," he said finally. "A formal inquiry will convene in 3 days." The Pack Council agreed. A pause. "Brennan withdrew the complaint against you before I asked. He worked it out himself, partway through, and he is not a man who enjoys being used." She thought, "Good." She said nothing. "The Silver Blade attack will be investigated as a separate matter," he said. "There are guards at the Wolfwood Passes until it's resolved." Another pause. "I was wrong about a great many things." "You were deceived," she said. "Specifically and cleverly and over a long period. That is the generous reading. It's the accurate reading. You can choose to be more critical of yourself than the facts support if you want, but it won't make you more careful in the future. It'll just make you more armored." He turned to look at her. In the dark, she could smell him clearly. Pine and cold water, and the warm wood smoke underneath, and something new tonight, present for the first time. The particular edge that scent readers called raw. The smell of a man whose careful control had been eroded by hours of very difficult truth. "You are extraordinary," he said. "I'm practical," she said. "There's a difference." "From where I'm sitting," he said. "There isn't." Her heart was not behaving. She looked at the winter bare rosemary bushes and breathed steadily through her nose and did not allow herself to respond to that. "What happens to the Luna position?" she asked. "That's before the council." His voice was even. The bond sealing ceremony was incomplete. It was interrupted at the verification step when the bond magic failed to confirm. "We were told it was a procedural irregularity. I now understand it was not." Marin went very still. The bond sealing. She had not been present for the private ceremony that followed the coronation. That was for Alphas and Lunas and their witnesses only. But she knew the ritual. Every wolf in the realm knew it. The Alpha offered his wrist and the Luna offered hers, and the bond magic either recognized or it didn't. And if it didn't, the ceremony masters were supposed to stop. "They told you it was procedural," she said slowly. "Yes." "Who told you?" His jaw worked. Celestine's ceremony master, brought in from her home pack. She thought about the scent she'd read in Celestine's room, that cold iron undertone beneath the gardenias. She thought about how long Celestine had planned, how carefully she had positioned, how many people she had in place before the coronation even happened. She thought about what it meant that the bond magic had not confirmed. She thought about what bond magic confirmed too. She thought about the white rook on the windowsill. She thought about a man at midnight in a training yard, alone, working through sword forms in plain clothes, with no crown, in the cold, and a woman watching from a window who should have gone back to her room and didn't, She thought about scent, the specific scent of pine and cold water and warm wood smoke, and how it had anchored itself into her memory in a way that nothing else in this keep had, in a way that meant her wolf sense tracked it through walls and corridors and stone, in a way she had carefully not examined because examining it would require her to admit what she already knew. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. "How long?" he said. She understood the question. She did not pretend she didn't. "Since the courtyard," she said. "When I first smelled you." A pause. "You?" "Since the coronation." His voice was very quiet. "You were holding her train, and I was standing on the dais, and I looked past her, and you—" He stopped. "I looked up," she said. "Yes." The garden was cold and dark and smelled of rosemary and frost and the two of them, and the bond magic, which was not mystical, exactly, just physical, the deepest wolf sense recognizing what the mind was too slow to catch, was in the space between them like a tide that had been coming in for weeks. "I chose badly," he said, "for reasons I thought were good: reputation, alliance, stability." His hands rested on his knees, and she noticed that his right thumb was pressing against the inside of his left wrist again. The same gesture from the coronation, the same private check. "I was looking at what I thought a Luna should be, and I did not see what she actually was, and I did not—" The pause was long. "I did not look at the right place. You kept looking at me," she said. "I kept trying not to." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, too raw for a smile. "I was very bad at it," she thought. "This is the moment." She thought, "I could protect myself." She thought, "I have been protecting myself my entire life, and I am very tired of it, and the edges are where the surprise comes from." "Kalum," she said. "Marin." She reached out and put her hand over his on his knee. Just that. Just the warmth and the weight of her palm over his knuckles. He turned his hand over and held hers, and the bond magic lit up so cleanly, so completely, so much like recognition. Yes. This. Here. Finally. That she felt it in her sternum, a bright spreading warmth, and she watched his breath change, and she knew he felt it too. They sat in the garden in the cold and held on. The formal council convened in 3 days as promised. Marin was called as a witness. She gave her account cleanly, in order, without embellishment, the way her mother had taught her. What, when, where, in sequence. And Lord Brennan asked her 3 sharp questions, and she answered all 3 accurately. And Culver, Brennan's senior advisor with the permanent unpleasant expression, asked her one more, and she answered that one too. Lord Aldrich, whose son had brought her border maps and a winter song, watched her through the whole testimony with an expression she could not read, and at the end he said, to the council rather than to her, "I have been an idiot," and no one contradicted him. Celestine was not in the council chamber. She was represented by a court advocate, which was her legal right. The advocate was competent and pressed every angle and made the most of the ambiguity in the silver blade evidence and the circumstantial nature of the Wolfsbane chain of custody. And Marin sat and listened and thought. She prepared for this too. She had lawyers ready. She has been preparing for this contingency since before the coronation. It was Ressa who closed the chain. Ressa, who had spent 6 years in the kitchens of Ashenvale Keep, and who had, over those years, quietly collected every odd request, every unusual delivery, every off-schedule order that had come through the service entrance on the Luna's direction. Ressa, who kept records. Tiny, precise notes in the back of her herb ledger, dates and items and names. Because she had grown up in a house where the powerful people lied, and she had learned very young that records were a form of armor. Ressa stood in the council chamber in her kitchen apron, because she had not been given time to change, and she gave her account in the same clean, ordered way Marin gave hers, and the records were exactly what the council needed. The advocate stopped pressing. The inquiry concluded. The Luna title was formally suspended pending the council's full hearing. An interim arrangement was announced for pack governance. Marin walked out of the council chamber into the main corridor, and Ressa was waiting for her. And Ressa said, "You owe me a very good cup of spiced wine." And Marin laughed, really laughed from somewhere low in her chest, and said, "I owe you several." He asked her that evening, not as Alpha King, not formally. He came to the kitchen garden where she had started thinking of as theirs, the stone bench, the rosemary, the frost. And he sat beside her, and he did not wear the crown, and he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it that if you say no, I will hear it, and nothing changes." He said it clearly, and he meant it clearly, and she knew, in the way she had come to know his tells and his truths, that he had prepared this sentence carefully, that it was important to him that she believed it. She said, "Ask. When the council's hearing concludes, I'll need to. There will be a new Luna ceremony, a proper one." He looked at the dark line of the wolfwood. The bond magic already confirmed. I noticed. That night in the garden, his thumb pressed the inside of his wrist. "I'm asking you if you'd consider a pause. I'm asking you if you want this." She thought about the word want. The way he'd said it made it exact and specific. Not what is proper, not what is appropriate, not what makes political sense. Want. "You're asking if I want to be Luna," she said. "I'm asking if you want me." He looked at her, direct, entirely unhidden. "The rest is negotiable. The title, the ceremony, the pack politics, all of it. None of it matters if the answer to that question is no." Her heart was very loud. She thought about the train. 16 feet of ivory silk organza, hand-embroidered with moon-drop pearls, and she had held it with both hands, never let it touch, and stood in the shadow at the edge of the room, and looked up once, and he had been looking back. "You know the answer," she said. "I want to hear it." She turned on the bench to face him, fully, the way she hadn't let herself do before. She looked at his face, the coin symmetry that concealed the tiredness, the gray-green eyes that concealed the river, the jaw that concealed the anger that concealed the grief. And she said, "Yes." He exhaled. She had not realized how much tension he had been holding until she heard it leave. He reached up and tucked a strand of her hair back from her temple, a gesture so careful and so simple that it was more intimate than anything she had imagined, and she felt it all the way through her. "Good," he said. His voice was rough and quiet and completely his own. She put her head on his shoulder and they sat in the winter garden under the cold sky, and the bond magic settled between them like something that had been there all along, waiting. The second Luna ceremony was nothing like the first. No ivory train, no 16 feet of pearl-sewn organza to be carried by trembling hands. She wore her mother's dark green wool with the copper thread at the collar, which was all she had that was fine. And when Lord Brennan, who was, in the end, a man of honor who found betrayal deeply offensive, offered to have the court seamstress prepare something more appropriate, she had said, "This is appropriate." And then she had looked at him steadily until he agreed. Ressa braided her hair. It took 20 minutes and required 4 different pins, and Ressa's running commentary on court fashion, and what constituted ceremonially reasonable expectations. And by the end of it, Marin was laughing, and her eyes were warm, and she walked into the great hall of Ashenvale Keep looking like herself. The hall was full, all 9 pack lords, the honor guard in full dress, the court members, the advisors, the senior staff, the ceremony masters in their formal white, and the same crowd of wolf shifters whose territorial markers were suppressed under gilt buttons and ceremonial collars. Except now the hall smelled different, not of triumph musk and candle wax and the performance of a sovereign doing what sovereigns do. Now it smelled of something older and deeper, something that went to the root of pack sense, the smell of rightness, of recognition confirmed. She walked in alone. Calum was already at the dais. He looked at her specifically, with full deliberate attention, the way she had catalogued him looking at her in crowded rooms, except now he did not look away. Now there was nothing to look away from. She walked toward him through the packed hall. She did not hold anyone's train. Both hands were hers, swinging free. The pack elder Sovin spoke the bond vows in old Ashenvale dialect, and this time she knew the words because she had spent 3 evenings learning them, and she spoke them clearly in the echo of the great hall where everyone could hear. And when she reached the line that the texts translated as, "I give my wolf to the keeping of your wolf," she said it looking directly at Calum, and he said it back looking directly at her. And the bond magic didn't flare. It didn't need to flare. It had already confirmed, already settled. It was already done. It simply deepened, like light strengthening at dawn. He put the Luna crown on her head. It was not the pale gold opal crown that had been made for Celestine. That was in the council's evidence room. This was older, silver set with moonstones, the color of river ice, from the keep's own historical collection, and it was heavier than it looked, and she felt it settle on her head with the weight of something actual and real. The hall sound rose, that animal sound, between applause and howl, the sound of packs acknowledging their queen. And then Calum did something she had not been told was part of the ceremony. He turned to face the hall, all of it, all 9 pack lords and their advisors and the honor guard and the crowd, and he said, in the carrying voice he used for proclamations, clear and even and filling every stone corner, "This is Marin of Greyvein, my fated mate, my Luna. The bond confirmed the night of the coronation, in the Wolfwood Garden, with no crown and no ceremony and no audience." He looked at the hall, at the pack lords, at Culver, who would find something unpleasant to smell about this and do it privately, at Lord Aldrich, who would be remembered as the man who was an idiot and admitted it, at Lord Brennan, who gave him the slightest nod. She was always the right choice. I was too slow to see what my own wolf sense was telling me. A pause. The hall was utterly silent. I am seeing it now. All of you are witness. He turned back to her. She thought she had been prepared for this. She thought she had imagined it, worked it through, understood in advance what it would feel like to be named. Out loud, in front of all the people who had spent a lifetime looking past her. She had not been prepared. Her eyes were burning. She held it. Barely. He looked at her with the full, unhidden look, the one with no cord in it, no coin, no performance. His hand came up and touched her face. That careful, deliberate tenderness. A man who moved through the world with great force, learning how to be gentle with something he did not want to break. "Don't," she said. Quiet, for him alone. "I'm trying not to cry in front of 9 pack lords." "Cry," he said, also quiet. "They can manage." She laughed. It came out wet and undignified and completely true, and he smiled, a full smile, the kind that changed his whole face, the kind she suspected very few people had seen. And the hall, watching their Alpha King smile at his Luna in her mother's old dress, understood exactly what they were witnessing. The bond sealed. She felt it close, the way a key settles in a lock, not with drama, not with magic light or sound, just the deep, certain click of a thing becoming permanent. Her wolf recognized his wolf and said, "Yes, this is right. This was always right." She had been in the shadows her whole life. She had held other people's trains. She had made herself peripheral, practiced invisibility, worn it like armor against a world that kept seeing past her. He saw her. He had always seen her. She looked up at him in the great hall of Ashenvale Keep, in her mother's dress, with the silver crown on her head, and she thought, this is what it feels like when the right person looks in the right corner. The hall was still roaring around them, that animal sound of packs and joy and recognition, and she did not hear any of it. She heard only the steady, certain sound of his breathing. She smelled only pine and cold water and the warm wood smoke underneath, and the new note that had entered his scent over these weeks, the one she'd been cataloging and refusing to name, which was, she understood now, exactly what she smelled like to him. Home. The scent of it was home. She had been found.